It was one of those nights on the road that stuck with me for a long time, the kind that digs into your mind and doesn't let go. I was hauling a load of timber from a small mill out in the northern woods to a lumber yard down near the city. It was late fall, just past the first frost, and the air had that sharp, cold bite that wakes you up after hours of driving. The highway was mostly empty, which I liked. Less traffic, less stress. But this night, that empty stretch was what made everything feel wrong. I had been on the road for close to 10 hours by then. The cab was dark except for the faint glow of the dashboard and the headlights cutting through the night. The only sounds were the steady hum of the engine, the tires rolling over the pavement, and the occasional creak and groan of the trailer behind me. The radio was off. I was tired but focused, eyes glued to the road ahead, watching for deer or anything else that might wander out. Around this time of year, animals get restless before the cold fully sets in. The highway I was on was a 2-lane road that wound through dense forest for miles. I had driven it dozens of times before, but tonight something felt different. I can't explain it exactly, just an odd silence, like the kind you get right before a storm. No birds, no bugs, nothing. The trees on either side looked black and heavy, their bare branches clawing at the sky. About halfway through my route, I noticed a car behind me, tailgating closer than I liked. It was one of those old sedans, dark color, with headlights that seemed too dim for the road. Usually, when someone rides my bumper like that, they want to pass. But this guy didn't pass. He just stayed there, barely keeping his headlights on, like he was trying not to be seen. I slowed down a bit, hoping he'd move around me, but he matched my speed exactly. I kept watching in my mirrors, and every time I glanced back, he was there, steady as a shadow. I didn't recognize the plate, but that's not unusual on a long haul. I tried not to let it bother me. Sometimes you get strange drivers on the road, nothing more. The road curved ahead, and I took it slow, leaning into the wheel. The trailer shifted slightly, and I heard the soft clank of the chains holding the logs. The load was tight, but I always checked it twice before starting. I trusted my rig, and I trusted myself. Still, the presence of that car was unsettling. I passed a small rest stop with no one around. The lights were flickering, casting long shadows on the empty lot. I thought about pulling in to take a break, but the guy behind me stayed too close. I figured I'd keep going until I reached a better spot. Around the next bend, the road narrowed, and the trees closed in tighter, like they were pressing against the highway. The cold air made my breath fog up the side window. My hands were steady on the wheel, but my neck was tense. I tried not to look back too often. Suddenly, the sedan's taillights blinked off, just vanished. 1 second they were there, the next they weren't. I glanced in the rearview mirror, but all I saw was darkness behind me. I eased off the gas and braked gently, checking my mirrors again. No sign of the car. For a moment, I thought maybe I'd imagined it or it had turned off the road. But the road behind me was straight for miles, with no exits or side streets. My heart picked up. Something about the sudden disappearance didn't sit right. I shook my head and told myself to focus. Maybe it was just a glitch with the lights or a car that pulled into the woods. I tried to push the feeling away. Then, just as I was starting to relax, I noticed something odd on the side of the road. A figure standing just beyond the tree line. At first, it looked like a person, but the darkness made it impossible to tell. It was motionless, staring at the road. I slowed down. The figure didn't move or step back, just stood there, almost too still. My headlights barely reached that far. I flicked the high beams on and off, trying to get a better look, but the figure vanished. I wasn't sure if I'd seen it or if my mind was playing tricks on me, but the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I kept driving, my eyes scanning the edges of the road, waiting for something to jump out. Nothing came. Still, my grip on the wheel tightened. I felt like I was being watched. About 10 miles later, the radio crackled to life out of nowhere. Static at first, then a voice so faint I could barely hear it. No music, no normal broadcast, just this low, broken sound. I tried to turn it off, but the knob was stuck. The voice got louder for a moment, then stopped abruptly. The sudden noise shook me, and I pulled over at the next turnout, my heart racing. I cut the engine and sat in silence, listening to the quiet of the night. The radio was dead again. I took a deep breath and looked at my phone for the time. No signal. Of course, this stretch of highway was notorious for dead zones. I debated calling it a night and finding a motel nearby, but I still had miles to go. The company expected the load delivered by morning. After a few minutes, I restarted the engine and pulled back onto the road, eyes peeled. My mind was wired tight, every shadow and sound amplified. Half an hour passed without incident. I started to calm down, telling myself the night was just playing tricks. The road curved out of the forest, and ahead I could see the first signs of civilization. The dim glow of streetlights, the silhouette of buildings. I relaxed a little, even smiled, thinking I was nearly through the worst part. Then the sedan appeared again, right behind me, headlights off just like before. It was closer this time, and the silence felt heavy. I accelerated a little, but it matched my speed instantly. No attempt to pass, just riding my tail like a ghost. That's when I saw the windshield. The driver wasn't there. At least no one was sitting in the driver's seat. I looked closely, squinting through the dirty glass. The seat was empty. I slammed on the brakes, and the sedan did the same, matching me exactly, perfectly synced. The engine roared behind me, and the tires squealed against the pavement. I shifted into reverse, backing up slowly, heart pounding. The sedan reversed with me, its empty shell a dark shape in the night. I was frozen between disbelief and fear. This wasn't possible, but there it was. Then the sedan's headlights flicked back on, blinding me for a second. I threw the truck into gear and slammed the gas pedal down, racing forward, the tires burning on the asphalt. The sedan didn't follow. It stayed right where it was, motionless, headlights shining like a warning. I didn't stop until I reached the highway exit. Once on the main road, with streetlights and other cars around, the sedan was gone. I pulled into a truck stop and parked next to a few other rigs. I stepped out of the cab, hands trembling, trying to make sense of what just happened. Other drivers were there, chatting and getting coffee. I wanted to tell someone but didn't want to sound crazy. I stayed awake the rest of the night, watching my mirrors, refusing to close my eyes. The next day, I called dispatch and asked if anyone had reported a strange car or anything unusual on that stretch of road. No one had. I thought about what I'd seen, the empty sedan, the figure on the side of the road, the radio voice. Maybe it was a trick of fatigue, maybe stress or the cold. But I still don't know, and I don't want to find out. After that night, I always avoid that highway when I can, sticking to the main routes where there are more trucks, more people, and more light. Sometimes, when I'm driving late and alone, I think about that empty car tailing me, matching every move, like it was watching, waiting. I never saw it again, but the memory stays clear. That night taught me that the road holds its own secrets, and some of them don't have easy answers. You learn to keep your eyes open, your hands on the wheel, and your mind sharp. Because out there, in the quiet dark, not everything is what it seems. I was driving through rural Pennsylvania one night, the kind of night where the rain just won't quit. It poured hard enough to blur my windshield, and the wipers were working overtime, but no matter how fast they went, the world outside stayed a wet, gray smear. The roads were slick, and the glow from the highway signs bounced off the water pooling on the pavement. I was hauling a load of scrap metal, just the usual late-night route through some of the quieter parts of the state, miles away from any real towns or gas stations. My rig's headlights cut through the rain, but not much else was visible. I was tired, but not ready to stop yet. I figured I had a few more hours before I could pull into a rest area and get some shut-eye. That's when I saw him, standing on the shoulder, thumb out, soaked to the bone. A young guy, maybe late teens or early 20s. His clothes were drenched, plastered to his thin frame. The rain was coming down hard enough that he looked like he'd been standing there for a long time. I wasn't the type to pick up strangers, especially not hitchhikers, but something about the way he stood there, just staring down the road, made me slow down and pull over. I didn't open the door right away. I watched him for a second, the rain running off his face like rivers. His eyes were wide, but not scared or desperate. Just empty, like he was lost or maybe numb to whatever was happening. After a long moment, I unlocked the passenger door and he got in without a word. The inside of the truck smelled like the usual mix of leather and old cigarettes. He didn't say anything, just sat there, dripping wet, water soaking the seat and floor mat beneath him. I gave him a towel I kept in the glove box, but he barely used it. He just stared out the window as I started driving again, the rain hammering against the windshield, the truck's tires hissing on the wet asphalt. I kept an eye on him in the mirror, but he didn't move much. His hands rested on his lap, fingers twitching every now and then. I thought about asking where he was headed, but the way he avoided eye contact made me hesitate. When I finally asked, his answer was silence. Just a long, empty stare out the window. It was strange, like he didn't want to be anywhere at all. We drove on for miles, the highway stretching empty ahead. The rain didn't let up. It felt heavy, pressing in around us, like the darkness was closing in. I kept checking the rearview mirror, mostly to make sure he was still there, still breathing. At one point, I saw his face shift in the reflection. His expression dropped like a mask had fallen away. His eyes darkened, his mouth tightened, and his whole face seemed to twist for just a second before he went back to staring out the window. It was quick, but it shook me. I pulled over at the next exit, a small, empty rest stop barely lit by a flickering street lamp. I told him to get out. He didn't say a word, didn't argue. He just slid out of the truck, still soaked, and walked off into the rain without looking back. I sat there for a minute, my heart pounding in my chest. That night stuck with me. I never picked up another hitchhiker again. I remember it like it was yesterday, even though it's been years. The night was cold and damp, that kind of cold that seeps into your bones after a long day of driving. I was on my usual route, heading south through the back roads of Pennsylvania. The rain had been steady all evening, the kind that makes the world look blurry and distant, like everything's underwater. It wasn't just rain. It was a storm rolling in slow, heavy, relentless. I'd been driving for hours, the truck's engine humming in my ears, the tires spraying water in long arcs behind me. The highway was almost empty except for the occasional car or tractor trailer far ahead. The radio was playing static most of the time, with the occasional country song coming through now and then, but mostly it was just the sound of the rain and my own thoughts. I was tired but didn't want to stop yet. The next rest area was still miles away, and I figured I could make it. That's when I saw him. The kid standing on the side of the road, thumb out, drenched. His clothes clung to his skin, his hair plastered down. He looked too young to be out here alone in this weather, but what caught me was how still he was. Not waving at any cars, not shouting, just standing there like a statue. Normally, I wouldn't even slow down. I've been on the road long enough to know that picking up hitchhikers is a risk, and you never know what you're getting into. I've heard the stories. Some truckers get robbed or worse, but there was something about this kid, something that made me press the brakes and pull over. The rain was coming down hard when I opened the door, and the cold air hit me like a slap. The kid climbed in quickly, dripping wet. I could hear the water slapping against the floor mats as he settled into the seat. He didn't say a word. His eyes were fixed on the window, watching the rain blur the world outside. I grabbed a towel from the glove box and offered it to him. He took it but didn't seem to care much. He just rubbed at his face and hair a little before tossing it aside. I fired up the heater and turned on the defroster to clear the windows. The warmth started to fill the cab, but the kid stayed quiet, almost like he was frozen in place. I tried to make conversation, asked where he was headed. Nothing, just silence and that same blank stare out the window. His face was pale under the rain, the lines sharp and tired. His eyes looked tired but not sleepy. It was like he was carrying something heavy inside, but wouldn't let it out. The miles passed slowly. I kept stealing glances at him through the mirror. He wasn't looking at me or the road, just out into the rain. After a while, I thought maybe he was asleep, but his eyes stayed open, unblinking. Then something changed. I caught it in the mirror. His expression shifted for a second. His eyes darkened. The muscles in his face tightened like he was holding something back, Or maybe something inside him snapped for a moment. It was brief but real, like watching a mask drop. My heart skipped a beat. I pulled off at the next exit, a small rest stop with flickering lights and puddles everywhere. I didn't say much, just told him to get out. He didn't argue. He opened the door and stepped out into the rain like it was nothing, walking away without a word or a glance back. I sat there for a long time after he left, the rain still hammering down on the truck's roof. My hands were shaking on the wheel, and my mind was racing. I've picked up plenty of people over the years, stranded drivers, folks needing a lift, but this was different. Something about that kid's silence, his sudden change in expression, and the way he just walked off like it was all normal stuck with me. That night, I made a rule. No more picking up hitchhikers. No matter what, the road is full of people and stories, but some things aren't worth the risk. Sometimes, silence and a glance in the mirror can tell you everything you need to know. That night was one of those times. I was parked at a small truck stop on the edge of a little town, the kind of place you don't hear much about on the radio or see in the news. It was the middle of the night, around midnight, and I was trying to get some sleep before the long haul ahead that would start before dawn. The parking lot was mostly empty, just a handful of trucks scattered around, and the glow of the streetlights barely reaching the far corners. The air was cold and heavy with the smell of diesel and wet asphalt from the rain earlier that evening. My cab was quiet, the only sound the soft hum of the engine's heater keeping me warm in the chill. I had pulled in a couple of hours earlier, hoping to catch a few hours of rest before getting back on the road. I shut off the engine, rolled the windows up, locked the doors, and stretched out on my bunk. My eyes closed easily enough, but sleep was light, always a little on edge when you're alone in a place you don't know well. Truck stops might seem safe, but out here, alone with hundreds of miles behind and ahead, you can't let your guard down. You learn to listen to every little noise, every creak and groan of the truck settling on its suspension, every distant rumble from the highway. Around midnight, I was just drifting off when I heard it. A slow, deliberate set of footsteps crunching on the gravel outside. My eyes snapped open. The sound wasn't just a random noise. It was steady and close, coming from right outside my truck. I sat up in the bunk and looked out the window beside the cab. It was pitch dark, but the streetlights cast a dim, yellowish glow that reached just enough to show a shape standing there. The figure was tall and thin, standing still by the side of my truck, right near the door. I couldn't make out much more than a shadowy outline, a person, no doubt. What made my skin crawl was the way they were staring directly at me through the window. The feeling was instant and sharp, like they were waiting for something, or maybe just making sure I was awake. My heart started pounding. I locked all the doors again, even though they were already locked. I pulled the curtains tighter, hoping to block the view. But when I looked back, the figure was still there, motionless, just watching. I told myself to stay calm. I'm a trucker, not a kid. I've dealt with all sorts of sketchy situations before, from angry drivers on the road to people messing with trucks at rest stops. But this was different. This felt personal, like that shadow was sizing me up, deciding if I was an easy target or not. Minutes passed, maybe 10, maybe more. Felt like hours. The figure didn't move or blink. It was just there, like a statue. I kept my eyes glued to that window, watching every tiny movement. The cold sweat ran down my back, but I didn't dare look away. Then, just as suddenly as the figure had appeared, it was gone. 1 second it was there, the next it was like it vanished into thin air. No sound, no movement, just gone. I scanned the parking lot, expecting to see it slip behind a truck or run off into the night, but there was nothing. The gravel was undisturbed except for a few scattered footprints from earlier, but none fresh. It was like whoever it was just disappeared without leaving a trace. I stayed awake for the rest of the night, too shaken to sleep. Every time I thought I was drifting off, my mind jumped back to that shadowy figure, standing silently in the dark, watching me. When the first light of dawn broke, I packed up quickly and headed to the diner attached to the truck stop. I needed to know if anyone else had seen something strange or if I was just losing it. At breakfast, I ran into a few other truckers. The talk was low and serious when someone mentioned a string of robberies that had been happening in the area over the past few weeks. They talked about trucks being broken into at night, drivers waking up to find their doors forced open, wallets, electronics, and other valuables gone. The police hadn't caught the thieves yet, and everyone was on edge, especially those parked at this quiet little truck stop. Hearing that hit me hard. I realized just how close I had been to becoming another victim. That figure outside my truck wasn't just a random passerby. It was someone looking to rob me, maybe worse. The way they watched, waiting, could have meant they were planning their move or deciding if I was awake or not. After that, I made a mental note to always park near other trucks or closer to the station, places with more lights and people around. It wasn't about paranoia anymore. It was about survival. I knew the road was full of risks, but that night reminded me that danger could come silently, just outside your window, waiting for the right moment. I felt lucky that morning, lucky to have woken up, lucky the figure left without trying anything. But I also knew I couldn't count on luck every time. From then on, every time I pulled into a truck stop at night, I kept my doors locked tight, the windows shut, and my eyes wide open, ready for whatever might be lurking in the shadows. I was driving my old rig late at night on a lonely stretch of highway near Gallup, New Mexico. The desert was quiet, the sky clear, and the stars scattered like tiny pinpricks of light, but the road was empty. No other trucks or cars were around, just me and the endless black ribbon of asphalt stretching ahead. I'd been on this route many times before, but this night felt different. The silence felt heavier, and the cool night air creeping in through the cracked window didn't help shake that uneasy feeling in my gut. The rig itself was showing its age. The engine rattled slightly, the cab smelled like old leather and cigarette smoke, and the dashboard lights flickered sometimes. The radio only picked up static, nothing but white noise on all the usual channels. I was tired, but I couldn't pull over. This was a route I knew well and I had a schedule to keep. About an hour into the drive, I noticed a vehicle behind me in my rearview mirror. At first, it was just a pair of headlights far behind, but it quickly grew closer, too close. It was an old safari van, beat up and dusty, like something out of a bad road trip movie. The paint was faded, and rust patches spread over the wheel wells and doors. The tires looked worn, and the windows were grimy, reflecting the yellow glow from my truck's taillights. What really caught my attention was a piece of cardboard taped over the license plate. Whoever was driving didn't want to be seen or identified. The van kept pace behind me, then slowly started tailgating. The driver swerved a little closer, inching up near the back of my rig, then falling back, then pushing forward again. It was aggressive, like they wanted to intimidate me, to force me off the road. My heart started pounding. The highway was deserted except for this weird van, and the thought of what they might want made my skin crawl. I kept my hands steady on the wheel but couldn't help glancing in the mirror every few seconds, watching the van's headlights flicker behind me. The tension built as the van moved closer and closer, matching my every turn, every curve in the road. I thought about calling the police, but I was in the middle of nowhere, and the radio was dead. My phone had no signal. If I stopped, I'd be an easy target. So, I kept driving, watching the road and the strange vehicle behind me. I reached down slowly, under the driver's seat, and pulled out the handgun I kept for protection. It wasn't loaded for show. I checked it quickly, making sure it was ready if I needed it. I kept it low, just enough to see if it might stop whoever was behind me. I wasn't going to start any trouble, but I wasn't going to be an easy mark either. The moment I let the handgun show through the side window, the van slammed on its brakes hard. The sudden red glow of its taillights lit up the dark road for a brief moment. It screeched, then peeled off the highway onto a dusty side road that led away into the desert. The van's headlights disappeared in the distance, swallowed by the night. I stayed on the highway, my grip on the wheel tight, heart still pounding like a drum. The silence after the van left was deafening. I didn't slow down. I kept driving, eyes peeled, ears listening for any sounds. Nothing came. The rest of the trip was quiet, but I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever those guys wanted, it wasn't going to be good. Later, when I made it into town, I stopped at a police station. I told them what happened, the van, the cardboard over the plate, the way they tried to force me off the road. The officer nodded, writing down my details carefully. He told me those guys had been spotted around the area before, trying to rob drivers by pulling them off the highway in the dead of night. The cardboard was a trick to avoid being caught on cameras or tracked by license plate readers. They didn't expect a trucker with a gun, someone ready to stand their ground. That's why the van backed off so quickly. They were looking for easy targets, not someone prepared to fight back. The whole thing stuck with me. Driving alone at night is always a little tense, but that night was something else. It reminded me that out there, on those empty highways, you never really know who's watching, who might be waiting for the right moment to make their move. It taught me to trust my instincts, to be ready for anything. After that, I made sure my rig was always stocked with what I needed. Extra ammo, a flashlight, a first aid kit, and I never hesitated to show I was armed if I felt threatened. I didn't want to be caught off guard again. Some nights on the road, the silence is just silence. Other nights, it's something you feel creeping up behind you, watching you, waiting for the right time. That night near Gallup was one of those nights. It changed how I looked at the road and the strangers who travel it, and it's something I carry with me every time I climb behind the wheel of my rig after dark. I was on a long haul, driving through a remote stretch of highway that cuts through miles of dense forest and empty fields. It was late at night, the kind of late where everything feels quiet except for the hum of the engine and the occasional flicker of the dashboard lights inside my truck cab. The highway itself was almost deserted, just the occasional headlights from another rig in the distance. It was one of those roads where cell phone service goes in and out, and the closest town was miles away. I'd been on the road all day, tired but pushing to meet my schedule. When I finally pulled over at a rest stop just before midnight, I was ready to shut down and get some sleep. The rest stop was a little gravel lot with a few trailers and a fast food joint that was closed for the night. There was a flickering streetlight that barely lit the place, casting long shadows across the parking area. After parking, I climbed into the cab, locked the doors, and lay back in the seat. I set the truck's heater low, enough to keep the chill off but not enough to keep me awake. I reached over to turn on the CB radio, mostly to have some background noise, the kind of static and chatter that usually helps block out the silence. Trucker talk was usually full of jokes, weather reports, and the occasional warning about speed traps or road closures. It was normal and it made the night less lonely. But then something different came through the static, a voice I didn't recognize. It wasn't loud or clear, just a crackle that sounded like it was barely coming through the radio. At first, I thought it was just interference or someone messing with the mic. But the voice was whispering. It wasn't the usual chatter. This was a quiet, urgent whisper, almost like a plea for help. I froze for a moment. The whisper was so faint I had to strain to hear it. But I could make out the words, "Help me," repeated a few times, broken up by static and crackles. It didn't sound like a joke or some prank. It was soft, desperate, almost scared. I keyed the mic and tried to respond, asking if anyone was out there and if they needed help. I waited, but the voice vanished as suddenly as it had come. The radio went back to normal static, then silence, then a few random truckers chatting like nothing happened. I sat there for a long time, staring out the window. The whisper stayed with me. I kept flipping through the channels, listening for the voice again, but it never returned. I even stepped out of the cab and scanned the rest stop area, but there was nothing out of place. No cars, no people, just the empty parking lot and the quiet road. I went back inside the cab and tried to shake off the feeling. Maybe it was someone playing a prank on the CB radio, or maybe my tired mind was playing tricks on me. I've been on the road long enough to know how your brain can start imagining things when you're alone at night. But even so, something about that voice didn't sit right with me. The next morning, I stopped at a diner to grab breakfast before hitting the road again. I was chatting with the waitress when a news story on the radio caught my attention. There had been a missing person report filed overnight. A young woman was last seen hitchhiking on the very stretch of highway where I had parked. Her car had broken down and she was trying to get help, but she never made it to the next town. The details were sparse, but the timing and location gave me chills. I thought back to the whisper on the CB, the quiet voice begging for help in the middle of the night. It wasn't a joke. It wasn't static. It was her. The idea hit me hard. She must have been out there somewhere, alone and scared, using the only way she could to reach someone. The radio. Maybe she didn't have a phone or any other way to call for help. The forest lining that road was thick and deep, the kind that swallows sound and hides people in the shadows. If something had happened to her, no one would hear her cries unless they were right there, listening closely. I felt a cold weight settle in my stomach. The highway that seemed so empty and quiet now felt different, like a place where you could vanish without a trace. The trucks that passed me the next day didn't have the usual hum of comfort. Instead, there was a tension in the air, a reminder that out here, help isn't always close by. I reported the strange voice to the local sheriff's office when I stopped at the next truck stop. They took it seriously enough to keep it on file, but there was little they could do without more information. The missing woman's case stayed open for months, but she was never found. Search teams combed the woods, and investigators talked to people who might have seen her, but nothing turned up. Sometimes, when I'm parked late at night on quiet roads, I tune into the CB radio, half hoping I won't hear that whisper again, but also half hoping I do. It's like a reminder that out there, someone might still be waiting for help, and it keeps me alert, knowing that on these roads, the silence can hide more than just empty pavement. I still don't know if it was a coincidence, or if I really did catch the last moments of someone in trouble. But that night, that voice was real to me, and it's a memory that won't let me forget how fragile things are out here, how easy it is for someone to disappear when no one is listening. I pulled into the rest area just after midnight. The road behind me was empty, the highway silent except for the soft hum of my engine cooling down. I'd been driving for hours, and I needed a break. My back was stiff, and my stomach was growling, so I figured I'd grab a snack and stretch my legs for a bit before hitting the road again. I parked my big rig in a spot under a flickering streetlight that barely cut through the darkness. The whole place felt dead, no other trucks, no cars, no people, just empty asphalt and shadow. The air was thick with that cold, heavy quiet you get late at night in the middle of nowhere, the kind that presses down on you, making everything seem still and almost unnatural. I grabbed my insulated jacket from the passenger seat, pulled it on, and stepped out. My boots hit the pavement with a dull thud, echoing too loudly in the stillness. The rest area was one of those small ones. Just a few picnic tables, a couple of porta potties, and the vending machines inside a little shelter that doubled as a waiting area. The whole setup was cheap and worn, like it hadn't been cared for in years. The fluorescent lights inside the vending machine shelter buzzed and flickered, casting uneven pools of cold white light onto the cracked concrete floor. I could see the rows of snacks and drinks lined up behind the glass, but the machines looked old and battered, with peeling paint and dents that looked like someone had kicked them in frustration a dozen times over. Still, they worked, and that was all I cared about. I walked toward the vending machines, the sound of my boots scraping against the rough concrete breaking the silence. As I got closer, I reached into my pocket and pulled out some change. I could feel my skin prickling like something was off, but I tried to shake it off. Just the usual nerves from being alone in a dark place late at night. I told myself I was just tired and maybe letting my imagination run wild. I pressed the button for a bag of beef jerky and a soda, waiting as the machines clattered and clanked to spit out my snacks. As I bent down to pick them up, I heard it, a faint sound, soft and quick, behind me. Footsteps. I froze and looked up, heart skipping a beat. The sound stopped. I spun around, scanning the empty parking lot and the shadowed tree line beyond it. Nothing. Not a single car, no movement, no sign of anyone. I shook my head, telling myself it was probably just an animal or my own ears playing tricks. I grabbed the snacks and started back toward my truck, but the feeling that I wasn't alone grew stronger with every step. I could feel eyes on me, like someone was watching from the darkness. I kept glancing over my shoulder, but all I saw were empty shadows. I tried to stay calm, but the hair on the back of my neck stood up, and my pace quickened. The night air felt colder now, like it was sneaking under my jacket and freezing me from the inside out. The rest area was a small dot of light surrounded by blackness, and I was suddenly very aware of how exposed and vulnerable I was. I passed the picnic tables, empty and abandoned, and the porta potties, their doors swinging slightly in the breeze. The whole place seemed like it had been forgotten by time, a forgotten pit stop for lonely travelers like me. I kept telling myself to just get back to the truck and lock the doors. Then I heard it again, footsteps, closer this time. Slow, deliberate steps, matching my direction but just out of sight. I didn't turn around. I didn't want to see who or what it was. I just kept moving, heart pounding, breath catching in my throat. When I finally reached my rig, I slammed the door shut and locked it tight. The metal thud sounded so loud in the silence it made me jump. I sat behind the wheel, hands shaking slightly as I started the engine. I didn't even bother eating the snacks. I pulled out of the rest area fast, the headlights cutting through the dark road ahead. I kept checking the rearview mirrors as I drove away, but there was nothing behind me. No car, no person, just the empty road and the dark woods on either side. I never stopped at that rest area again. No matter how long my shift was or how tired I got, I wouldn't pull off there. It stayed burned into my mind. How alone I was, how the silence turned into something else, and how I knew without seeing that something was out there, watching. Even now, when I'm driving late at night and I pass by other rest stops, I remember that place. It wasn't ghosts or stories made up by scared people on the road. It was real. It was something waiting, something watching, and I wasn't ready to find out what it was. I was driving down a quiet stretch of highway late at night, the kind of road where you rarely see another car for miles. It was near midnight, the sky completely dark except for the pale light of the moon and the dim glow of my truck's dashboard. The highway was straight and flat, lined with tall trees on both sides, their shadows reaching toward the road like dark fingers. I was tired from a long day behind the wheel but still alert, knowing that driving at night on empty roads had its own dangers. The hum of the engine and the soft sound of the tires rolling over the pavement were the only noises breaking the silence. The radio was off. I didn't want distractions, just the steady rhythm of the road and the occasional flicker of headlights from distant cars. I kept my eyes on the road ahead, scanning for any signs of animals or obstacles. Then, out of nowhere, a man ran right in front of my truck. He just appeared, darting out from the edge of the forest without warning. My heart jumped. I slammed my foot on the brakes and jerked the steering wheel hard to the right, swerving to avoid him. The tires screeched against the asphalt as the truck fishtailed slightly before I managed to steady it again. The man didn't stop. Instead, he kept running back and forth across the road in front of me, almost like he wanted me to hit him. At first, I thought maybe he was trying to cross the road, but the way he moved didn't make sense. He was weaving left and right, almost dancing between the lanes. He looked desperate, wild-eyed, but there was something else there too. Something cold and empty in his stare that sent a chill down my spine. I wasn't the only one who had to react. Behind me, I could see headlights flashing and hear other trucks and cars hitting their brakes hard, swerving too. Some drivers honked their horns, but the man kept moving, blocking the highway in a way that made it impossible for anyone to pass safely. It was like he was daring us, mocking us, even putting his life in our hands. I glanced in my rearview mirror and saw a line of vehicles piled up, their drivers probably just as confused and scared as I was. No one was speeding or trying to run him down. Everyone was just trying to avoid hitting him. It was one of those moments when time stretches out and everything slows down but feels sharper at the same time. My heart was pounding, sweat forming on my forehead despite the cold night air coming in through the cracked window. I kept my hands tight on the wheel, eyes locked on the man. I didn't dare try to go around him. The shoulder was narrow and rough, full of gravel and debris. It wasn't safe to pull over either, not with him blocking the road like that. I tapped my horn a few times, hoping to scare him off, but it didn't work. Instead, He stopped running for a moment and looked right at me. His face was pale and streaked with dirt, his clothes torn and dirty, like he'd been living rough for a long time. There was no recognition in his eyes, no sign that he knew what he was doing. Just a blank, eerie focus. Then he started running again, faster this time, back and forth across the lanes. I felt a surge of anger mixed with fear. Why was he doing this? Was he drunk? Was he trying to hurt himself or others? Was there something wrong with him? I couldn't understand it. I finally managed to get my phone out and called the police. I kept the truck idling in the middle of the road, making sure I didn't hit him while I spoke. I told them exactly where I was, describing the man and his strange behavior. The dispatcher sounded concerned and promised to send someone out quickly. But even after I hung up, the man was still there, moving like a ghost trapped on the pavement. The minutes dragged on. Other drivers started inching their way backward, trying to turn around and find another route. I stayed put, watching the man closely, not trusting him or the situation at all. I had no way to predict what he might do next. His wild pacing was hypnotic and terrifying. Eventually, I heard sirens far down the road, the flashing blue and red lights reflecting off the trees. The man stopped again and turned his head toward the lights. For a brief moment, I thought maybe he would surrender or at least stop causing chaos. But instead, he sprinted toward the trees, disappearing into the darkness as quickly as he had appeared. The police arrived moments later, their headlights cutting through the night like sharp blades. I told the officers what I saw, pointing toward where the man had gone. They said they'd search the area and warned me to stay put until it was safe. I waited for what felt like hours, but no one found him. The officers came back shaking their heads, saying there was no sign of anyone out there. No footprints, no tracks, nothing. The highway was empty again, quiet except for the hum of my truck. After a while, I started my engine and continued down the road, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The whole scene stuck in my mind. The man's strange running, his empty eyes, the way he vanished without a trace. I thought about what could make someone act like that in the middle of nowhere at midnight. I kept replaying the moment over and over. Maybe he was lost, confused, or hurt. Maybe he was trying to get help but didn't know how. Or maybe he just wanted someone to notice him, to stop for a second in the endless night. Whatever the reason, I never found out. The police never found him either. Driving the rest of the way, the road seemed emptier than before, the night darker. I kept my speed steady, eyes scanning the shadows along the roadside, half expecting to see him again. But he was gone, swallowed up by the night and the silence. That night stayed with me long after I stopped driving that route. I told the story to other truckers and drivers I knew, but no one had heard of anything like it happening before or since. It was one of those strange moments that makes you realize just how unpredictable and eerie the road can be, especially when you're alone in the dark. The man's face, his movements, and the way he disappeared haunted me. I never saw him again, and I still don't know what he wanted or why he risked his life running like that. All I know is that sometimes the road throws things at you you can't explain, and sometimes you just have to keep driving, hoping the next mile is quieter than the last.